Hey, James Craig, spelled C-R-A-I-G. I'm running for mayor of the city of Detroit. Well, that's a great story. So I've been a public servant for 44 years, starting in law enforcement here in the city of Detroit. I was born here in the city of Detroit. And so I started with the Detroit Police Department under then Mayor Coleman Young. After 2.5, almost 3 years, I was laid off like 1,500 other police officers. And I had to make a decision. Do I go to Toledo, Ohio after the layoff, or do I go to Southern California? Well, the choice was kind of easy. I ended up going to California, where I stayed for 3 decades almost. During my time there, I moved up the ranks. A lot of notable accomplishments. I was at one point the president of the African Americans Association in LA called Oscar Joe Bryant Foundation. Maybe that was my initial entry into politics. I served in that capacity, ironically, during the Rodney King incident. And it was that time that I certainly got exposed to both national and international news because it was a big event. I rose through the ranks, retired at the rank of Captain 3. I was a commanding officer over a station in South Los Angeles. And then I achieved my ultimate goal to become a police chief. My first stop was Portland, Maine. I served in that capacity for 2 years. And then after that, I was the chief of police in Cincinnati. I served in that capacity for 2 years. And then I got the ultimate call from Michigan to return home as Detroit's police chief. And that was during a very challenging time, as you know. That's when the city was facing bankruptcy. I came under an emergency manager. And so I served in that capacity here as chief for 8 years, and then decided to run for political office of governor for the state of Michigan. That didn't quite work out so well. And now here we are looking at running for mayor. What really I'm most passionate about is serving people. I never looked at myself as a politician. Even though I'm running for political office, I am truly what defines a public servant. And that's a great question because I had the good fortune of coming in a time where the city was probably in one of the most challenging times, going through bankruptcy. A lot of the basic needs were non-existent in the city. Street lights were out, and certainly roads weren't being sought in the winter. Trash pickup, infrequent. Transportation, questionable at times. The police department, 1 hour response time to 911 calls for service. Embarrassingly low clearance rate to homicides at 11%. So with Mayor Duggan, myself, certainly a lot of the basic necessities were corrected and still being corrected. But for the most part, what you experience in other cities, and I had the good fortune of living in a lot of different cities, and so it was never any discussions about street lights out or trash pickup, but that was the Detroit reality. What I see going forward as the mayor of Detroit is to take it to the next level. While a lot of great work has been done, the work continues, and my key piece is neighborhood focus. Because I was police chief, I certainly had the awareness of some of the challenges that existed and still exist today in many of our neighborhoods. As I've talked to residents across the city during my time as chief, the one thing they would always say to me is that, you know, Chief, downtown looks great, Midtown, Corktown, but what about my neighborhood? And so, and that's a great point, and so that will be certainly one of my focuses. Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, there are a number of key issues, and I've already talked about public school education. And even though the mayor does not control public schools, it's a key factor. The mayor certainly, as the CEO of the city, the mayor, in a perfect world, should be able to control the schools. But I think it's important that the new mayor come in and partner with the schools, because one of the things that I learned very uniquely with our public school system, I found out in very short order, and I've done a lot of work as a police chief working with schools from Cincinnati to Detroit, but it's broken. I mean, the standard is that a third grader should be able to read by the time they're in the third grade. I learned that only 8% can read, because if you can't read in the third grade, you can't read to learn in the fourth grade. So that's a big key. And we talk about the vitality of this city and moving forward and really capturing a workforce from our city. If our young people can't read, that's a problem. I saw it firsthand as a police chief hiring Detroiters. There were challenges, certainly, when you talk about the entry-level exams. I saw it when Mayor Duggan successfully negotiated with Stellantis to open a plant for the first time in over 30 years. What was interesting about that, when I got out of high school, graduated from Cass Tech, my goal then was to be an automotive engineer. So I was working at Chrysler at night, going to engineering school in the day. But the difference was the manufacturing plant of then, and this was 1974, you just walk off the street, go get a job. Now, manufacturing, automobile manufacturers, are very technical, and they have like an entrance exam. And unfortunately, some of the candidates, some of the Detroiters, had a problem with that exam. So the city was very aggressive about assisting with remediation. Again, I saw it with candidates coming into the academy, and those who did get into the academy certainly had some challenges with academics in the academy. So it is a key challenge, and if that can't be fixed, because we know if young people can't read, there's a greater likelihood that they might drop out. And then if they drop out, there's a likelihood, or a greater likelihood, they could end up in the pipeline of crime. And so that, for me, touches a lot of places. And so many might say, well, Chief, what do you have to do with education? You're the mayor of the city. Well, if you're the mayor of the city, it is important. It's critically important. And that's something I'm very passionate about. Not to leave the other important issues out, like, public safety is key for me as well. But that all ties in together the way I see it. Well, the first thing I would do, the very single most, coming in the city when the city was bankrupt and the impact it had on our city, it would be very critical for me to ensure that a transparent forensic audit was done of the financial health of our city. Critically important. And so we can't go back into bankruptcy, but not just that we do an independent forensic audit, but that information is made available to every person in the city of Detroit. Critically important. So that would probably be at the top of my list. Certainly, historic issue. I know that when I came in as chief, crime was high. We successfully lowered violent crime, but there's still a high perception in our city. I know too many people have approached me since I left the police department, and they would say, Chief, I wish you were back. Now, it has been widely reported, Detroit has seen some of the lowest homicides rates, and since this last year, I think it was in the middle 60s, 65. But then let's talk about the perception of crime and the impact of public safety. So that's certainly something that I would focus on to make sure to enhance the work that's already being done with a neighborhood focus. And I'm glad you asked that question, because we've made dramatic improvements on my watch, and certainly at the forefront of that was building a trust-based relationship with the community. I couldn't figure out early on why so many Detroiters had a distrust in the police department. And what it all boiled down to was confidence, a lack of confidence in the ability of our officers to get out and do the kind of work, and it's broken trust. I remember not long after I was appointed, and I always use this example, there was an apartment building on the east side of Detroit called the Colony Arms. And I'm gonna digress for a moment because it's important to say that one of the things that I was told coming in the door, even before my swearing-in ceremony, is that, and this came from a police officer. He said two things, Chief. we want to be cops again, and we want you to fire everybody at the rank of then inspector and above. Those are appointed ranks by the chief. So I took that to heart. I want to be cop again. Well, because the community had lost total confidence. And so with that said, I learned of this multi-story apartment building on the east side of Detroit that was a hotbed of all kinds of criminal activity. Drug dealing, prostitution, shootings, dope dealing, you name it. Many used to coin the phrase that from that movie, New Jack City. They compared this location to a location in this movie. And so I decided in a very transparent and public way to launch a move on that building. Now, what was ironic about this building, it was only a block and a half away from the mayor's Manoogian mansion. At the time, Mayor Bing was still in office. We launched 200 police officers, notified every news station, and we went in to send a message to our community that the police are in fact back. They are absolutely back, and so we did that. And in doing so, I'll never forget the images of people leaning out the window, applauding the police department. And in one instance, we did the same operation in the Martin Luther King homes. I never forget a woman who came out on her front stoop, fell to the ground, raised her hands up and said, thank God, the police are back. So that really changed the trajectory. And certainly when it came to the executive level folks that were in the department, and what that one officer told me, certainly there was very little leadership in the police department. I'll call it that. And so I did go about the business of making some changes at the top, very effective changes. As you know, Detroit was under federal oversight for 13 years, one of the longest running consent judgments, only exceeded by Oakland, California. And we got out from under federal oversight that cost the taxpayers of this city $1 million a year. And we did that in 1 year. And so I know how to do this when it comes to public safety. I was successful in every city I led. And while the work still continues here in Detroit, I will continue to enhance those police-community relations. Well, and that's a great question as well. Certainly, small business development is a key part of my platform. I've had an opportunity as I began to launch this campaign for mayor to meet with small business owners. And it was a common theme coming out. One, the city's red tape bureaucracy, as I might call it, is very cumbersome. So anybody that's trying to launch a small business has to wait. And so one of the things that I would do coming in is continue to have those roundtable meetings, which has worked very effective for me when I was chief, and it will also work very effective for me as mayor to understand what are some of the problems. And the common theme is, you know, I'll give you one example, because I met with a young lady who opened, or who is almost complete in opening, a cigar bar restaurant on the east side of Detroit on Mack. And we talked, and she said, well, Chief, I own 3 businesses. I said, really? I said, where are your other 2 businesses in Detroit? I made the assumption. She said, oh no, they're not in Detroit. In fact, they're 2 of them are in Dearborn. And I said, why is that? It's less red tape. The process is streamlined. And so, I'm having so many issues with the city getting through the red tape. And some might think, well, that's not too much of a big deal. It is a big deal, because it's not a business-friendly environment. Now, this is not certainly an attack on the current administration, because a lot of things have been done. Certainly, there's been a lot of work in drawing large businesses into our city, and certainly Motor City matches, you know, those things worked as well, but we have to continue to do better. And so that's going to be a driving force for me during my candidacy and as mayor of the city of Detroit. And then workforce training. That's critically important. I know I am a product of Detroit Public Schools, and not everybody wants to go to college. Not everybody wants to get a four-year degree. And in my case, I did want to be an automotive engineer, but I knew leaving high school, and I went to the one and only high school in Detroit, which is Cass Tech. I have to put, and so, I had developed the skill of automotive mechanics. And I mean, it's those kind of things that we really need to push forward so that folks are adequately trained, especially as we move into this new era of technology. So I met a young man as I began to launch this campaign, and he's in the real estate and development, and he has found a way for folks that can afford, even people getting in homes with a 500 score credit, which is amazing. I had not heard of this, but not just that, but programs that are zero down payment and showing the potential buyer that I can get in this home with no money down and pay less than I'm paying for rent. Critically important, and I think that's something I would want to continue to drive forward as mayor, but also understanding that part of that is financial literacy. I mean, because again, I had no idea that someone could get in a home with a 500 score, but we have to train folks to understand that, because it's no secret. When I was growing up in Detroit, we probably had more among African Americans. There were more African American homeowners in the city of Detroit than probably anywhere in the country. And a lot of it had to do with a vibrant automobile manufacturing plants that were here in Detroit. I mean, and so the decay was evident, certainly when I returned after 30-something years. It is a balancing act, and I think that is critically important. But this might be somewhat off of topic, but it's relative. So it's no secret that we've had more than our share of abandoned homes, and I know the mayor did a good job at addressing that issue, but it's more work that needs to be done. I know the Detroit Land Bank was put in as a way to streamline that process, and frankly, just like some of the zoning ordinances that are outdated, those need to be fixed. BC, they do all the inspections, and that going more towards business, that needs to be overhauled. But it is a balancing act. I like when I see what they did with the Motown Museum and but we can do both, and I believe we can do both. But we also have to take care of some of the blighted properties that are land banked owned, and nothing's being done. It moves very slowly, and those who want to purchase a land bank home, really it's a challenge for them. They can't do it because of the amount of time. And I've heard talk, and I haven't confirmed this on my own, that sometimes out-of-country buyers, out-of-state buyers can come in, buy these properties on land and do nothing with them. And I think Detroiters, folks who live here, should have first shake at that. Well, I kind of already addressed it to some degree. I'm very passionate about the public schools, as I've indicated. I'll say it, I think they're broken. And when you look at our high school system, by example, I think the top schools right now, public schools, and I know I'm gonna miss one, so for your viewers, Cass Tech, King High School, Renaissance are top high schools. But every family should have an effective high school in their community. And it's just not acceptable when you try to figure out why are so many people moving out of Detroit, especially young families who have children, because they always say the same thing. I met a lady who's a young entrepreneur, and she lives in Westland. And I said, why do you live in Westland? She said, well, I have a high school son, and I want to make sure he gets a good education. That's an obligation. And so, again, I know that the mayor doesn't control the schools, but the mayor can certainly play a role, if nothing more than a partnership with the schools. And use your bully pulpit, because every time I talk about schools, most folks in our community know it, and it's just nothing has changed. And I've oftentimes said that, I came in at the same time with the current superintendent in 2013. If my performance in the police department was on par with the performance of public schools, they would have fired me within 6 months. And so it's not acceptable, and I'm gonna continue to speak truth on it. Well, first of all, I've demonstrated, I've been in executive leadership, and certainly here in Detroit for 8 years, one of the longer running police chiefs, but also served in the capacity of deputy mayor. So I had a front seat to how the city should run. And even more important, coming in when I came in, and while it was controversial under emergency management, Kevin Orr ran the city, and the controversial part of it was that those elected to positions didn't have the power to execute on running the city. And as police chief, I came in and didn't report to anyone sitting in a political seat. And I knew that would be short-lived, but it was important for me in this short window to go in and do the kind of things that needed to be done, those critical things, without having to go through a political process. And we did that. For example, I talked a little bit about the consent judgment, but many of the police stations in our neighborhoods were closed. One that comes to mind, on the far west side, the 8th precinct was shuttered. It was closed, and it's the most densely populated area of the city. And having come from other cities, some larger than Detroit, I understand the impact of closed police stations. In fact, not only were they closed at 5 o'clock, the ones that were still, the physical buildings that were still open, they were closed at 5 o'clock. This is the city of Detroit, which at one point was considered the carjacking capital of the country. And we did something about that as well. But having said that, we took buildings that were vacant and repurposed them and opened police stations in neighborhoods. It was very critically important to do that. Well, a couple of things come to mind, but I want to take a moment and talk about the Greenlight Detroit project, because while it started out as a very small thing, but it was really what I call a grand example of a public-private partnership. And so, as brief as I can be, the Greenlight program basically came to me in a dream. When I first got here to Detroit, the people of Detroit, police officers, they were somewhat desensitized when it came to carjackings. Now, I came in July, I believe, of 2013. By the year end, there were over 800 carjackings in the city of Detroit, 800. And nobody seemed excited about it. And I get when you live somewhere, and this is what you know, and it happens, I see the world with a different set of lens. And so, even as big as LA is, and LA had its share of crime too, certainly organized gangs throughout the city. However, I went to my staff, I said, look, we really got to understand this carjacking that's going on in Detroit. I said, where's it happening? And so clearly the data that came back was happening at gas stations, happening at liquor stores, and usually during the hours of darkness. So I intuitively knew that to address this issue, we would start off with those locations that were clean, friendly, welcoming to our residents, people who work here. And so I said, what's that got to do with stopping carjackings? Because I know that criminals don't like to commit crimes in places that are clean. And that was the early iteration. And then we put signage up. We had it with a little green light. And then as Mayor Duggan was transitioning in, the other big thing we did was put in a real-time crime center in our new headquarters. And what was great about that, only a couple of large cities had a real-time crime center. And New York, of course, had a state-of-the-art. Los Angeles had it. And so I was very familiar with it. But what we did so different here in Detroit, when we started promoting Greenlight, and the mayor and I were in sync on this, is that what if we partnered with our small businesses, we worked with Comcast that had high definition cameras and Wi-Fi, so that we could connect these locations, which have traditionally been hotbeds of this kind of criminal activity. We did that successfully, built a partnership with the businesses, and that's what it takes. And it was very successful, so much so that when you look at the carjacks in 2013 year end and compared to my last year, which was 2021, we went just below or right at 200. That was a phenomenal. And so that's the kind of leadership that I bring, someone who is innovative, who thinks out the box, not afraid to take risks, because that's what you need. If you want to change something, you got to be a risk taker. And fortunately for me, because I've been other places, I don't look at the lens through just, this is Detroit, and this is the way we've always done it. So and here's another great example. I certainly don't want to bog down on this question, but so for example, in the city of Detroit Police Department, we had police officers that were working inside the 911 call centers and dispatching calls to officers in the field. And we're talking about police officers, full duty police officers who could be better utilized out in the neighborhoods, and they weren't. Instead, we had this ridiculously high response time, widely reported as 1 hour. And so I started thinking, every city I've worked, the people that held those positions in those call centers and as dispatchers were civilians. So right then I knew if I redeployed sworn police officers back into the field and hired civilians, that we could not only get more officers in the field doing the work that they were hired to do, but we're going to save the taxpayers money. And we did that. Now, was it met with quite a bit of resistance? Change is difficult, but leaders know how to bring people to the table and really sell the change. And again, it wasn't an easy lift because Detroit police officers were doing this when I was here in the late 70s and beyond. So the key was doing something that made sense and it worked. And then the last thing I'll say that was something that was unique to Detroit, officers that direct traffic. In most cities, like LA and Cincinnati, for example, you hire civilians to do that. And so we did that as well. So that's the kind of leadership, innovation that I'll bring, unafraid, courageous, to drive our city forward. When I say lessons, I'm gonna think of one thing, and I know to your viewers, readers, leadership is critically important. I understand the impact that when you're in a key leadership seat, the tone that it sets for a city. And so, for example, one thing comes to mind, certainly post George Floyd and the unrest that was visibly seen in so many of the large cities across America and some smaller cities. And so, as chief, being able to handle what could have potentially been a significant crisis and significant costs, people injured, significant costs to our taxpayers, businesses shuttered because the safety was gone. Mayors have to be able to handle crisis. And it's not the if, it's always the when. And this is not something you read in books on how to manage a crisis. You need someone who's been there and done it. And I've been there. And as we all know, Detroit was probably one of the few large cities. There was no looting. There were no buildings on fire. There were certainly some attacks on police, not a lot. But by and large, in comparison to places like Chicago, Philadelphia, even my old home of LA, broad unrest in those cities. And it didn't happen here. And so it's important that a mayor be able to handle a crisis. And I'll give you some more recent examples. In two large cities, New Orleans and LA. Recently, LA experienced probably one of the most horrific wildfires that I was aware of. I know in years past, when what they call the Santa Ana winds, there's a high probability there'll be a wildfire somewhere. Generally, they're in very rural areas. But what was different about this, the winds were very high, and parts of LA burned. I had not seen this, and this was recent. The mayor left the country, unaware if she understood that, these wildfires at the rate of the Santa Ana winds and the impact that could have, but less critical about her decision to leave, but more critical how she handled it when she returned to LA. Widely known, she gets off her plane from Africa, and the reporter asks her one basic question: do you think, when you slashed the fire department's budget, do you think it had an impact on the LA Fire Department's inability to fight the fire? So she did what she should never do in a leadership position. She looked down, and walked away. Not the message the mayor should send to the people that are looking to you for leadership. And the second instance was the most recent terror attack in the French Quarter in New Orleans. So the mayor and the police chief, they were preparing for, the Super Bowl. But here we are, New Year's Eve. And the French Quarter, that's a location where people go to congregate. So certainly if a would-be terrorist wanted to attack a place, that would probably be it. Well, he did that. But what was problematic about that, the state had generated reports on certainly the French Quarter and the high potential for an attack. And so what I understand from reports is that nothing was done, it was ignored. And then when the police chief was interviewed about it, simply said, when asked about these barriers that are erected so that vehicular traffic cannot come into the footprint, she said, I didn't even know about them. Didn't know they were there. So what message are we sending people that expect a mayor, a governor, a police chief? That's one of your core responsibilities, is safety. Yeah, and that's a great question, because I am sensitive to that. As I pointed out, I grew up in this city. Certainly didn't grow up with a gold spoon in my mouth. But one of the things as chief, because I wanted equitable police services to every neighborhood. I didn't want one neighborhood to have say a neighborhood translated into, they probably pay higher city taxes, call it Palmerwood, Sherwood Forest. But I wanted police service to be equitable. And so we birthed what I call the Neighborhood Police Officer Initiative. And what I did, and not just in some of the more affluent neighborhoods, but every neighborhood had a neighborhood police officer. And we very effectively divided the city up in what we call scout car areas, and I attached a single officer to that geographic footprint. But more important than just that, I wanted to make sure that that officer had a direct relationship with the residents, primarily addressing crime issues, quality of life issues. And while some might say, well, what's so important about having an officer to go in and meet with the owner of, let's say, a party store that's drawing a lot of low-level criminal activity? It's very important, because that person who lives in that vulnerable neighborhood may not feel safe to go into a location like that. So that's called equitable policing across the board. Not one area is better than another. In fact, what most don't know, we talk about just using policing as an example, many of the vulnerable neighborhoods, certainly there's more crime. And so we typically would deploy more officers because we have to, because there's certainly a higher increase in calls in that area. And so we have to, and so they actually get more. It's just that it doesn't always feel that way, especially when you live in an area of high crime. But as mayor, I know that Mayor Duggan implemented a similar program across the city with district managers, and they performed. The district managers work very well with our neighborhood police officers, and so that would certainly be an initiative that I would continue to push forward, because I know the value in that. Because what Mrs. Smith needs over in what they call the red zone on the east side is very different than what somebody needs over in Sherwood Forest. It has to be equitable. Well, that's interesting. I know the mayor has done a phenomenal job at really enhancing public transportation, because when we came in, it just was infrequent bus schedules. I mean, that's something that's probably near and dear to my heart, because my dad was a longtime city worker. He started what was then called the DSR, Detroit Streets and Railways. So I watched him, and then bus service was very different, and it was robust. And you could get on a bus and go to school. I mean, I had to travel from my West Side home to Cass Tech, and I did it by public transportation. And so that's going to be a continuation of work in progress. Where we are today as compared to where we were, say, just pre-bankruptcy. But there's still a lot more work to do, because as you indicate, there's some families that just don't have access to transportation. They don't own a car. And then on that same note, we look at part of the challenge, and I know this is something that Mayor Duggan really worked hard to change, and unfortunately, insurance rates. I've heard it from small business owners, certainly those who could afford a car, maybe can't afford insurance. And so how do we tackle that problem? One of the things that I'm gonna look at in a very out-the-box, innovative way, yes, you can look at it and say it's a legislative issue. Why should Detroiters have to pay so much more? How do we level the playing field there? There's gotta be a way. I don't have the answer, but I do have the answer that I think we can create some competition, because it came to me recently, even with small businesses and the insurance they pay. So what if a green light location, who is now a safer location because of the green light, wouldn't it be novel for an insurance company to come in and say, if you're a green light and you're a green light customer, you have that relationship with the city, we're going to reduce your insurance rate by X%, whatever that might be. That might be a small thing, but that's certainly a start. Well, that's a very complex question, and unfortunately, there are issues. You talk about our environment, you talk about the access to healthy meals, which, I find it surprising that even Kroger, that's in the suburbs, there are no Krogers in Detroit. And why is that? Is it because of the cost of the food that they sell? Is there a way? I mean, I applaud the work that Meyer's doing to bring a different variety into the city. And yes, I think clean water, Detroit, unlike places I've lived, you can still drink tap water here in Detroit, but how do we sustain it? And that's something that I would be working on, because we can't have a Flint situation happen here in Detroit. And I know there's been a lot of work at upgrading the infrastructure here in Detroit so that we won't run into those kind of problems. So there was a recent article that came out that talked about post-bankruptcy and where we are, the fiscal health of Detroit. It is concerning. I know I've talked to some retirees. They're concerned about their pensions, retiree health care, and so those are important issues for me. I talked about it at the beginning of our segment here, is really having and launching an independent forensic fiscal type audit of our financial health. And that should be done right away, because we need to know all of us need to know where we sit. Decisions cannot be made if we don't know where we are fiscally. And so it would be important for me as the mayor and working in close concert with City Council to make sure that we are fiscally healthy. And so the mayor can't make certain decisions. Where's our waste at? Are there things that we're doing that we need to improve on? I think it's important that the mayor have a direct link into this White House because we're going to need federal and state dollars to help keep us above water. And if we don't have that, that's going to be a big challenge. And so I believe I am the candidate and the leader that will keep that line into Washington, D.C. open for support, the state. And I've worked in different cities, and it's not about political ideology. It really is more about the issues and knowing how to lead and get things done. You know, I'm aware that Detroit has kind of moved in to becoming more tech savvy, if you will. There's training, and certainly that's not going to change. We can't be left behind. I mean, I even use the example of even just automobile manufacturing. This is not the assembly plant of the 50s and 60s. And so our young people come up have to be trained, have to understand, technology. And when you look at where AI is going now, if we don't ensure that our potential workforce is trained and understands it, we're going to be left behind. And so I want to continue to build on what's already started. I know down in the Wayne State area, they have a lot of technology that's going on, but we have to get young people from our communities involved in this. I believe I will be the next mayor of Detroit because I'm the one candidate who has been tested. And while I put a lot of emphasis on handling crisis, if crises are handled improperly, it can cost the city a lot of money. It would take years, and that's why I use the two examples, the one in LA and the one in New Orleans. This is not a time to have someone who's amateurish, and this is certainly not an attack on any of the other people working. I'm not suggesting it at all. There's a lot to say about, having 44 years of public service and being able to handle crisis after crisis. Again, Detroit's been blessed. We haven't had, major crisis, but we have had them. Even if it's nothing, if it's a mass shooting, that has a dramatic impact on neighborhoods. And so what next? But we need to have a leader that people can look to and say, I trust him. And I trust him because he's demonstrated in the past. And that's why, when people approach me daily and they say, I'm pushing for you to be our mayor because we need a leader who understands how to handle a crisis situation.